Hey everybody, what is going on? I am Maximus Rex and this is Big Baby Reviews. Today's Greg Capullo Day, so we're looking at the next issue of Quasar, issue number 20, cover dated March 1991, very early on in his career. First kind of mainstream title he worked on regularly. I've talked about this before. I feel like compositionally, Greg Capullo is already pretty solid, but not quite the Greg Capullo aesthetic that we're going to come to know and love, and that will be helped when he's on Spawn by the inking of Todd McFarlane to eventually lead to Greg Capullo kind of incorporating all that stuff into his style. And then, no matter who's inking him, he's just got a great, cool looking aesthetic on top of his art. So not quite there yet here, but the composition, the dynamics are definitely there. I love this kind of shot of this character in the foreground moving in towards Quasar. Quasar's pose is pretty dynamic, and one thing I find lacking in these Quasar issues is the coloring. The coloring is the one thing that I feel is really kind of hurting the look of the book, as well as the inking, which I don't feel is the best suited to Greg Capullo's. So let's have a look inside and I'll tell you more about that. This one is, as you see on the cover here, guest starring the Fantastic Four. Kind of odd, sometimes when you have a guest, or most times when you have a guest star, you want them to figure more prominently on the cover. This one has the Baxter building, right? The Fantastic Four tower, pretty prominent, but the Fantastic Four themselves are all pretty small on there. So kind of an odd choice, I think, for the cover. I would imagine Quasar's not the best-selling title back then. So to have a guest star, usually, like all those Marvel issues where Wolverine was the guest star, most times he figured pretty darn prominently on the cover. And the idea was try to sell more books. We're going to get some cool kind of cosmic shots from Greg Capullo, which I think he excels at. I've talked about before, though, how I feel the inking doesn't necessarily help him out. Keith Williams is the inker. Greg Capullo is the penciler. Mark Grunwald is the writer. Janice Chang letter, and Paul Beckton is the colorist. So I've talked about before how I feel the inker is just using way too big of a white splatter here for space that doesn't quite work. If he'd used more of this smaller splatter all the way throughout, I think that would have been a little more effective. But the actual composition and look of space here is pretty darn cool. And he's given us, the good old Kirby crackle, which everyone uses. And I feel like even some of these planets here, some of these designs on them, they're almost like Steve Ditko-ish kind of designs. But yeah, not quite there yet with the Capullo aesthetic, if not with the composition. There's just, every once in a while, I'll kind of spot a face that I feel really is reminiscent of what Greg Capullo does more of in the late 90s and even today. So funny enough, this background character here, this lady here, I feel is pretty indicative of how Capullo draws the ladies. And that to me is definitely recognizable as a Capullo face. Talked about last issue, I like this character's design. I'm not sure if Capullo designed him, if he existed before, but very kind of a Kirby inspired character for sure. And anytime you do that, I'm going to enjoy it. And even the close-up here, you can see kind of the Kirby flourishes in his helmet and his costume and his design. So that I like for sure. All throughout, right? Every time you see him, he looks pretty darn cool. Not quite sure about the coloring on him either. Like I said, I just feel like the coloring overall is lacking in the Quasar series. Great kind of cool shot here where he's, emanating or using his power, and the Kirby crackle becomes magenta here. It's kind of like a color hold. Very cool. The sound effect zoots is kind of hilarious. But yeah, sometimes, like I said, you see a face, like here, and it just feels a little bit amateurish as opposed to what we're going to see from Capullo in just a few years. But everyone's got to start somewhere. And like I said, he's certainly not lacking in any of, the composition, the dynamics. I think he does really well here. Jack of Hearts gets hit by a power emanation here. And I mean, just very powerful panel here all the way throughout. Even the foreshortening on this guy, simple but effective. But like this kind of inking right here, you're not going to see that on Greg Capullo. Soon, it's going to be the image aesthetic all around. And that's what's going to be incorporated even in the mainstream titles of Marvel and DC. I still feel like this is in between the 80s and the 90s. So some of it still reflects kind of 80s kind of house style inking. And some of it is a little bit more forward looking or forward thinking. I know exactly how you'd say that. Yeah, these sound effects in this issue, Volthum, like just, yeah, they're kind of fun to read and interesting. I don't know if I've seen these words used as special effects before. This, I think, is very effective as far as like, you know, the power emanation, the exploding kind of feeling you're trying to get across. But then the stuff going across here, not quite as much. And I feel like that's probably the inker coming back with some white medium. So, you know, I would have left that alone, just kept those lines. There's later issues inked by an inker who I think is better suited to Greg Capullo's style, where we're going to get these cool cosmic shots, and I just feel like they're going to look so much better inked by this other guy. But here's another panel where I'm like, yeah, I definitely see, you know, what Capullo will become here with, you know, the faces on the characters and the layering of the elements, and definitely a Capullo composition. He was already very strong, even in 1991. And there's just sometimes, like I said, it just feels like I'm not asking for a ton of more detail here, but it almost feels kind of like stuff's been left out here as far as the inker doing his job. Even on the shot of the face here too, it's like, just again, because of some of that lack of detail, feels a little bit amateurish here. But every panel with this guy I think looks great. The only thing that's kind of unfortunate, I gotta say, is this kind of skirt kilt thing he's wearing. Doesn't kind of feel in tune with the rest of his look, right? I'm looking at it, especially in this panel here, it almost feels like, remember in the 90s when people used to take like their sweatshirts and just tie them around their waist and let them hang down? I feel like that's what's going on here, so it's just a little jarring to me in as far as his overall look. I like this establishing shot here of the Baxter Building, the Fantastic Four Tower. You know, the angle of it, just the simple kind of small panel with lots and lots of buildings, I think is a good way to evoke your establishing shot without having to draw a big image and lots of detail. So yeah, just a quick way in and out, kind of an image way into the establishing shot, I guess. And boom, the Fantastic Four show up, and again I see, like, oh man, the inking on this just, to me, destroys anything Capullo laid down. Just looking like Marvel House style 1985 there. And again, very quickly that aesthetic is going to go away and the image aesthetic is going to take over. So kind of looking forward to that if we get a little bit of that on Quasar. This idea of having the Kirby crackle in the shadows here, I think, is a good one and could work, but I feel, you know, I'm assuming it's the inker once again, just the way it's done here is kind of haphazard and quick and not quite as systematic and doesn't work as well as it should. And I mean, they colored it white, but I feel like maybe the red of the costume would have been better here, like to not have this differentiation here. The Kirby crackle should have been colored the same as her uniform. Kind of, again, the coloring here, just lots of odd choices that don't help the art. Here's another example where I don't feel like it helps it very much. And here's the thing too, is like as far as the Fantastic Four go, they're guest starring, but we're not going to get very kind of cool up close shots of them other than this one here, which isn't that great, which is unfortunate. You know, you want to give, I think, a little bit of screen time or bigger panels and stuff to your guest stars, especially in this case being the Fantastic Four. One of the rare glimpses of Mr. Fantastic using his powers here, you know, I don't know how you can make Mr. Fantastic's powers cool or look cool, but I think Greg Capullo does an okay job here where it doesn't look too ridiculous. There's just something inherently ridiculous about his power set. You know, they were created in 1961, so yeah, there's just something a little bit goofy still about the Fantastic Four. They almost feel like they're more part of the 50s than the 60s in a way, right? Or at least, you know, the early 60s were very similar to the 50s still, I guess is how I'd put it. I like this background element here. The textures I think are great, and there's a good sense of depth in that image where we got parts of it that are in the foreground up close here. We've got Quasar in the middle ground, and we got more kind of middle ground background elements of this texture here. Works really well. But the colors are muddying it up a little bit, right? Like it's getting harder to differentiate kind of the different elements. Red and green are complementary colors, but I don't feel like it works quite so well here. Maybe a lighter red would have worked. I don't know. You know, you don't spot Quasar right away. My eye is attracted to the textures here. Yet another example of the colors really not helping the art in any way. Kind of gets confusing around here. You know, you've got good contrast between the dark green and the light and the white here, but you're losing a lot of the figure here and some of the colors on this character. A lot of color holds throughout this issue, but again, not necessarily helping the art in any way. Here's another cool shot of our, I don't even know this guy's name, not that it matters, but I just, again, the Kirby angular elements on his chin here and his helmet, I just love all that stuff. Clearly Greg Capullo knows his Kirby and is using it here. But yeah, other than this character, there's just visually not much that's interesting here. I can't wait to get to the more interesting issues with the better inker. And then eventually, I think once we hit the reviews on X-Force, the art definitely kind of kicks up a notch. And again, it's got a little bit more of that image aesthetic. And when I say that on X-Force, Greg Capullo has more, I would say, of an Extreme Studios, Jim Lee, Scott Williams kind of aesthetic, which makes sense because, Rob Liefeld has just left the title. There's a few fill-in artists, and then Greg Capullo comes on, so you don't want to rock the boat too much. You're kind of doing a similar thing to Rob Liefeld, and there's really some cool examples of that when we go through X-Force, so I can't wait to look at that. But yeah, I mean, the best part of this issue, I got to say, is to me this character here, who again has kind of a curvy vibe, but here almost reminds me of, if you ever seen the Transformers movie, the animated movie, the first one from 1986, 87, somewhere around there, some of the Junkacons in a weird way. He reminds me of a Junkacon here. Clever way of using Quasar's, insignia, his logo, as part of the art here. So I think that's kind of cool. Good design choice there. And having it actually overlap the panel is a good idea too. Helps, again, create a sense of depth. An image that's pretty simple and doesn't have that many layers. Adds a third one to an image that would only have two. Very simple, non-detailed shot, but again, I think this is kind of the very indicative and let me try that again. Of the type of facial structure that Capullo uses for his male figures, and that you'll still see some of this later on when he's working on Batman, for example, right? Very similar kind of facial structure. That typical thing where he draws, he's very fond of defining the top lip and not the bottom. So something he shares with John Romita Jr. does that a lot as well. Yeah, again, some of these coloring choices, like to have them all in white here, just, I get what he's going for with the contrast and stuff, but it just doesn't work for me. And even this bit of the colors, this yellow here, just seems odd to me. I feel like maybe just the straight up orange around here would have been better, and just maybe a light yellow actually on the figures would have worked better for me. So here we are back on Earth, back with the Fantastic Four. This lady has been taken care of by the Invisible Girl and the Human Torch. And Quasar goes off. And that's pretty much most of the story here. Again, not looking at this for the story, but it's about as much plot as you're going to get out of me on this one. This is interesting here. I don't know if that's some sort of weird printing thing or if that's a screen tone that was used. And again, just not very Greg Capullo-ish at all. Kind of like this, the way this sequence is colored though in the dark. The fact that they use kind of this dark blue here, I think actually maybe one of the only sequences in here that I find the coloring works really well. And it's basically Eon telling Quasar that his father had actually passed away, and he was kind of impersonating him so as to not traumatize Quasar, I guess. I guess finding out that your father is being impersonated by, some sort of cosmic entities should be traumatizing in and of itself. And that's basically where we're left off with this issue. Kind of, again, the writing is just not anything I'm into. This is a pretty typical thing. The big-headed villain behind our character. Obviously, he's not literally there, but kind of giving us the exposition. The typical kind of villain fashion. My plan proceeds apace. In one night, I've not only caused Quasar to drop his guard against the threat he was appointed to combat, but I've also driven a wedge between my two greatest adversaries. Now, by the time they realize what I've done, it will be too late. This almost feels like this is straight out of the 60s, right? So kind of an older school storytelling, a principle clashing with, a newer artist who will be going on to bigger, greater, and better things in as far as his artwork and in as far as the books that he's working on. All right, guys, there you go. That is it for today's review of Quasar issue number 20, guys. Looking forward to doing some more reviews in the future of Greg Capullo later on Quasar and on X-Force. There's some more exciting stuff to look at for sure. If you are still subscribed and you are still watching, thank you so much. I really do appreciate you being there. And if you are watching but you're not subscribed, please do so below. It only takes a quick second for you. It really helps the channel out, helps us grow, and helps get us out there to other people who are into comic books, just like we are. So once again, thanks for watching, guys, and have yourselves an awesome day.
Like, subscribe, like, subscribe.
King Comics presents Big Baby, Volume 1, Issues 1 to 13, 204 pages of story and art. King Comics also presents Star Crasher one-shot, 32 pages, cosmic sci-fi surrealist adventure. You can find these fine comics at KINGCOMICS.CA, at MaximusRex13 on Instagram, or on Facebook, MaxRex or Big Baby.